Hello, thank you so much for joining us this evening on this St. Brigid's Day, Law Fhéile Bríde. My name is Miranda Driscoll. I'm the Interim Director of Solas Nua in Washington, D.C. Solas Nua presents the best of contemporary Irish art to US audiences. And this evening, we're really delighted to welcome Landless, a four-part a cappella group based in all four corners of Ireland. And they will be in conversation with Gemma Tipton, who is a journalist who writes for the Irish Times and many other publications, and who's based in Kinsale in County Cork. So this evening is really a conversation. We're going to hear some tracks as well. So what I would do is urge you to root out a pair of headphones or plug into a decent speaker, because the recordings are really beautiful and you want to be able to hear the words properly. This evening's event is sort of the first part of a commission that Solas Nua has made with Landless. So we've commissioned Landless to produce a concert of songs, and this is a partnership with visual artist Ruth, who's also in Landless, and Niamh Moriarty, and it's called Two Miles of Earth for a Marking Stone. And it's got so it's a concert, but it also has a visual, a very kind of experimental film element to it, and that is being produced at the moment, and will be coming to you on the 8th of March. So we'll be streaming that as part of Solas Nua's Capital Irish Film Festival for International Women's Day, and just to thank the Irish Embassy for their support on that. I also want to thank Landless, of course, for being here. It's just so nice to see you again. I'm so sorry that we're not able to meet in person. But it's really great to be able to do this, and to very much thank Gemma Tipton for her generosity and her thoughtful questions. Also to the Solas Nua team, in particular to Michaela Sridhar, who's looking after us this evening in all of our technical requirements. So that's it really from me. Just to say that the event is actually pre-recorded, so unfortunately we won't be able to take questions for the artists, but feel free to make any comments in the chat as the event progresses. Thank you and enjoy your evening.
Welcome. Thank you all for joining us today with Solas Nua in celebration of Law Fhéile Bríde, St. Brigid's Day. And I'm delighted to be joined by Maeve, Lily, Ruth and Sinead, who collectively are Landless. Obviously not Landless, we are coming to you from Belfast, Dublin, Sligo, Cavan and Cork. And I actually think that's a really lovely way of bringing in that idea of how music connects us from around the world. And one of the things that Landless do so beautifully, which we will be talking about, is how songs travel through place, but also through time. Landless as a group got together in 2013. They met in college. They, as you probably know or will discover by the end of our talk together, make absolutely astonishing magic when they sing together. So without really embarrassing them further with superlatives, I'd love them to speak for themselves. During the course of this chat, we'll also be hearing 3 of their wonderful songs. But I'd love to know a little bit more about how you came together as a group, and also where that name comes from. And Maeve, would you like to talk to us about that?
Yeah, so myself and Ruth actually met in art college in 2007 in Dublin, and we started singing traditional songs then together. And we met Lily and Sinead over the next couple of years in like singing sessions and singing circles around Dublin. But it wasn't until 2013, as you said, when we were all invited to a singing festival in Drogheda, just north of Dublin, when we kind of put a song together with harmonies in a kind of an impromptu fashion, but we just decided to keep going then because we enjoyed it so much. So.
And do you have to really like each other to sing in a group?
Luckily, we all do like each other. So. Yeah.
And no creative differences then?
Nothing that jars too much, Gemma. Like only if there's anything, it would only add, you know. Like I think we're all relatively on the same page in terms of like what we like and what we're interested in, and that we've like developed a sound. And I don't think anyone is scared to say, you know, I don't think that works, or something else might work, you know. So, and we're
But
all very good friends.
I can immediately hear that you're both from different parts of Ireland. And are the musical and singing traditions very different then?
In
Maybe.
between Belfast and Cavan. That's funny for me, Gemma, because I'm not from a traditional family, so my experience of traditional music is based in Dublin. Um, and in terms of like the songs between Belfast and Dublin, I would say probably there is like a little bit of a difference in terms of like people from Belfast will be singing Belfast songs and people in Dublin will be singing Dublin songs, you know. But there's also like a massive crossover, you know. I
like
don't know if
none of
anybody else.
Sorry, Lily?
Oh no, I was just gonna say, yeah, like none of us really came from big like trad families, kind of. Like we all would more of, like Sinead said, like you know, come to singing through singing sessions and stuff in Dublin and Belfast for Maeve. So maybe we have that in common as well.
And did
I
you
just
always know? Sorry.
and say Lily's mother is an amazing folk singer, so Lily actually did grow up with some singing around her for sure. Like
Yeah. Oh yeah, definitely. But it wasn't like deep in the family. Like she kind of would have been in the like the London Irish scene really in the 70s, kind of.
And did you all always know you could sing?
No, I couldn't sing at all. Apparently, when I was a child, all I wanted to do was be an opera singer, and I would sing my life every day, but I was like not in any way in tune, and my parents felt really sorry for me.
oh,
So what changed?
Figured it out. I don't know. I'm glad though. That's a relief. Didn't go for the opera though.
yeah.
Well,
I have an awful memory. Sorry, Gemma.
No, I was just going to say, we will hear that actually Ruth has a glorious voice, but we're going to hold
Really
off
good,
to
yeah.
Sinead's story. Go on.
I like was singing all the whole way through my childhood in school, and I have an awful memory of a family gathering where I was asked what I wanted to be when I grew up, and I said a singer, and everybody laughed at me. But I'm having to laugh, so it's fine.
And how about you, Maeve? You're being very quiet about your childhood talent.
Yeah, well, my mum and dad would be singers, but not necessarily traditional singers. So, like, my mum would sing in the kitchen. My dad sings in the morning when his voice is really low. Like, it's quite natural for my family to sing. And apparently, I sang when I was a baby in the cot. So yeah,
actually,
singing would be a thing in my family, but again, not necessarily old songs, you know.
But that also does speak to something else that is really important, and it's the pure joy that singing brings to you personally. I haven't a note in my head, but I love to sing.
That's the main thing.
Yeah.
Anyone can learn.
Yeah, and they really can. Like it's one of, I think there are some things where people are so convinced that you can either do it or you can't do it. And I don't think that's the case. Like I know tone deafness is real, but I think it's very, very rare actually. And like anything else, you know, I say I can't draw, but I don't draw. So like anything else, you do need to work at it. And I definitely, when I think back to like the way I used to sing in the early days and sessions, and it was just horrible because I never practiced, you know, I'd just go in and sing real and yeah. But
so there's hope for you, Gemma. There's hope.
Well, I think it's time we got a little bit closer to that inspiration. And the first song we're going to hear is Fhéile Bríde in honor of St. Brigid's Day. And I think something that's really interesting about a lot of our saints' feast days is how much they lean into the pagan roots of where we've all come from. And St. Brigid is a wonderfully interesting example of that. And also the very, not just Irish, but we like to claim it, strong woman. And I'd love to hear a little more about the background to this song, a little about Brigid herself. And Ruth, would you like to bring us in?
Yeah, so the song, which is called Lurach Fríde, which is Irish for Brigid's breastplate, It was commissioned by RTE Radio 1 for their first Folk Awards, which was in 2018. And the idea was to commission a song that would celebrate the lives of women over the past 100 years, because it was 100 years in 2018 since women got the vote in Ireland. And it was also the same year that we repealed the Eighth Amendment. So the starting point was to take Brigid as this kind of symbol for women and women's strength. So the poet Anne-Marie Ní Chomhairán, who's a really great Donegal poet, her first collection is called Blood Root, which I would recommend. She was commissioned to write the lyrics, or she wrote it as a poem, and then we would take the words and put music to them, write music that would go along with it, and then a filmmaker was to make a video to accompany the whole thing. So like you'll hear in the song that it kind of goes through the various symbols attached to Brigid and her associations, like she'd be the goddess of poetry and healing, as well as smithcraft. So she kind of runs through some of those symbols and sort of celebrating the strength of women in a very like subtle, poetic kind of way. But it's like dedicated to the children from the Bon Secours mother and baby home in Tuam. So it does kind of allude to a darker history in Ireland as well, and the treatment of women. And there's like a line actually at the end, what runs unseen must emerge, which seems extra poignant now, having like last month they published the big report into the mother and baby homes. So that idea that this past kind of is always, there's an undercurrent of darkness anyway. But it was lovely for us to take these words and to make new music for it. So it's a new song, but it definitely is in a traditional style, I would say.
And tell us how the video came about.
So that was just us being really cheeky, and we were recording a song for the launch of the Museum of Literature in Dublin, and we just snuck into the University Church on Stephen's Green, and there was no one there, and we took some chairs and set up our camera and recorded our song, and no one showed up, I don't think, or at least they were hiding if they did.
For people who haven't visited Dublin yet and are looking forward to it, the Museum of Literature is a wonderful new museum celebrating Irish writers with James Joyce's original Ulysses notebooks. And I believe Joyce actually went to college there. It's got a gorgeous legacy, but nearby is this tiny church, which is so beautiful and atmospheric. What was it like to be inside?
Lovely, like we love taking advantage of a good acoustic. In fact, actually at the festival that Maeve mentioned, where we formed officially a band, we went straight to the church in Drogheda to sing to the head of Oliver Plunkett, who is or was a Catholic archbishop who was the last Catholic martyr in Ireland in the 1600s. And I don't think, it's not that we're particularly attached to him. We probably would have sang to any head that was going. But they have his relic in the church there. So it's in our history anyway, sneaking into churches.
Again, if you're planning a whistle-stop tour of Dublin, of Ireland, one of the most extraordinary things in Drogheda is this enormous church on quite a narrow street, and in it, to celebrate the great saintliness of Oliver Plunkett, his head's on display in a gold case.
Yeah, he'll let you sing to him.
I think it's also interesting, and that Saint Brigid in particular, she was like known especially for like the protection of pregnant women. To mention about the, what's just recently come up and the Tuam, the story in Tuam, and that on the eve of St. Brigid's Day, like traditionally, women would put a little piece of cloth outside their house, and St. Brigid, as she was traveling around Ireland, would come and she'd put a blessing on the house, so for like safe pregnancy and for safe birth, and that Anne-Marie did an amazing job in capturing such strong images the whole way throughout the poem. So I think
And
that the video
actually,
also came from our excitement about like how um well, how excited we were to sing such an amazing song, you know,
and for anyone who hasn't been following that part of the news from Ireland, through the dedication of a wonderful local historian, Catherine Corliss, they discovered that women who had been usually unmarried and pregnant were taken basically to places called mother and baby homes, where they were ostensibly meant to be cared for, but the care from the religious orders wasn't caring. And a great number of babies died unrecorded. And Catherine Corliss discovered their burial place on the grounds of this mother and baby home. And that's some of the background to this incredibly powerful song. So maybe we should hear it now.
yeah.
Thank you.
Strong is the milk of the kine on which I was raised. For an arrow of fire I was named. This song is for my firstborn son, my little love, my bloodthorn, dream back on earth too soon. When I came, the beasts in the field cried out, as lonely as the ash in spring. My oxen, my boar, my rambling bloodless stare, their breath warm on my hand. For laying with a king, I paid dearly. Shall not guide the ends until grist blade made the sound of breaking. Now in the house that guards my source, a red wick on a silent tongue, a wooden
That was just beautiful. Thank you. And welcome everyone back into the world. Actually, watching and listening to that in a church setting, I was struck by, I won't say similar because your voices are very much your own, but to some of Monteverdi's choral music, and that idea of music being able to bring you literally, as we said earlier, across time and place. And I'm also thinking with a cappella or sean-nós or folk singing, one of the astonishingly wonderful things about it is you are your instrument. And if you lose everything, you can still make music. And if you have everything, you can still make music. And I think that's incredibly special. And I'm wondering within that really long tradition, how you find your songs and choose them and find the ones that you're going to make your own. And Lily, I'd love to know what you think about that.
Yes, so I guess like a lot of our songs, particularly at the start, would have come from singing sessions that we went to. Like we said, there's a great kind of, in a way, a more recent tradition actually of like singing only sessions in Ireland. So the Goleen would be the big one in Dublin, the Belfast singing session that Maeve helped set up, and the Night Before Larry Got Stretched is another Dublin one that myself and Sinead and Ruth were involved with from the start. So
tell me where that name comes from.
Oh yeah, so it's a song. It's the name of a song. It's actually The Night Before Larry Was Stretched, but we got it a little bit wrong. But then it means we get better search results. People are looking for us. So it's yeah, it's as far as I know, an anonymous ballad, wasn't it? That was is that right? Yeah.
Yeah, but it's probably a real guy who was stretched or hung.
Yeah, so it's pretty grim. But it's a brilliant ballad. It's worth looking up, and there are some really good kind of current Dublin singers who do really good versions of it. So yeah, so those kind of live settings. There's also a traditional singing festival in a show in Donegal that we've all been to. Maeve and Ruth went to first, I think, many years ago, and it's just an amazing wealth of songs. So like, yeah, the main problem being then that you can't go back to these places and sing the songs that you've learned from people. But we would also, you know, get songs from recordings. Like we all, I suppose, would have been very influenced by the kind of revival era of traditional music, like everybody else, of kind of Irish and Scottish and English and American songs, all kind of slightly different times. So we absolutely watch videos of people on YouTube. There's no kind of preciousness, I suppose, but then maybe try to do like a bit of digging afterwards and try and find you know, some earlier recordings of things so you can make them your own and you're not kind of imitating contemporary artists, might be the process of that. And there's a lot of really good online resources from archives like the Irish Traditional Music Archive, and yeah, kind of ones in different countries. So that would be, I suppose, where we start.
And I'm also thinking that's, you were saying the Night Before Larry Got Stretched. I'd love to know what Larry did. But that being a song where the name of the author is being lost through time. And do songs then come to be owned by the people who made them famous, or how does that work?
Yeah, that's interesting. Like, I suppose, yeah, it's a big question because a lot of songs that people think are traditional aren't as well, to be like, that's definitely something that happens, that it's a big question, I suppose, and an interesting one. But a lot of I suppose songs enter the traditional music canon and get sung in these environments, and then, you know, people think that they're as old as time, and they're often, they were written by someone, you know, were printed as a ballad, but then, you know, also the opposite happens, I suppose, and maybe people who aren't so familiar with traditional music would associate a song that might really genuinely be very traditional and old with a particular artist or something. But that's kind of the nature of it, I think.
And there's a lovely quote, I think it came from you, Maeve. I'm obviously very hung up on this idea about time and again mythology with Fhéile Bríde. From Brian Fhéile about the Irish connection to mythological figures. And can you remind us of that quote?
I think that was Ruth that said that,
Oh,
actually.
sorry for stealing your thunder, Ruth.
It was, but I actually couldn't find it again. It's one of those things that now I'm doubting that it ever happened. But I think it is a quote from Brian Fhéile, or at least an idea from him anyway. That go on.
Sorry, and what was it that he may or may not have said?
Just this idea that in Ireland sometimes people can talk about mythological figures or heroes as though they're just your neighbours down the road, and it's just this kind of casual proximity to the past that we maybe have sometimes.
I guess a lot of us are named after kind of mythological characters as well, and it's just a familiar thing to us. You know, we read the stories in school and that kind of thing. So, yeah.
Well, you certainly have the mother of all strong women to live up to with your name. Do you feel you're channeling her sometimes?
I have read some of the stories, and she doesn't seem like a very nice person. So seems a bit greedy. But yeah, it's she's a great character.
Again, for people who haven't been brought up on the tone, this was Queen Maeve who started really a massive, some people would call it series of skirmishes, some all-out war with the High Kings of Ireland, because there was a particular bull that she had her eye on. Do you want to tell me?
She knows what she wants, yeah.
Yeah.
About Maeve and her bull?
Yeah, I think like actually, because in Sligo there's a big tomb on top of a mountain that you can see from most places in the town called Queen Maeve's Graves, where it said she's buried standing up facing her enemies in Ulster, which I think is amazing.
Hilarious, yeah.
But I love that, especially around here anyway, you really can't go 5 minutes without stumbling across some kind of antiquity, and they are kind of worked into the landscape in a funny way. Like down the road in a housing estate near me is a stone circle, very ancient stone circle, but in the middle of it they've put a Jesus and Mary shrine, and it's in the middle of a housing estate, so it's just really incongruous. I mean, they're repurposing it, which is fine, but I do like the proximity to the past that we have, but also we maybe don't always have the best attitudes towards it, and you could take it for granted in terms of government policies and in the name of progress kind of building roundabouts through national monuments. It's not always the best approach, but then I think we also have potentially a really intangible, like that's very physical connection to the past, but maybe there's a kind of intangible thing as well. And I was thinking about this lovely book that's just come out by the travel writer Manacon McGann, where it's called 32 Words for Field, and in it he gives all these definitions and context to really beautiful old Irish words that are in the process, a lot of them, of being lost because they might have been tied to like specific farming practices or fishing practices that are maybe not as relevant, and they're kind of slipping away. And a lot of them have these amazing double meanings. So for example, one of them is pucon, which on the one hand means a muzzle for a goat, or a tin shade for a thieving cow, which is nice. But on the other hand, it means a supernatural covering for a being from another realm, so it can remain unseen. And it just means these two things simultaneously, which I think is this really lovely way of thinking and holding the kind of everyday mundane reality and the completely fantastical together at the same time. And like in some parts of Ireland, you could go now and people will talk to you about berries in a very matter-of-fact way, just they just live down the road. It's a natural part of life. And yeah, this thing that you can have a subtlety of understanding of the world that
I think
like
that's
mysterious.
That idea of subtlety of understanding is a really lovely way to put it. And I think it's also quite musical because a lot of those myths and stories and relationships are carried forward through the oral tradition and song.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking about when we were having a chat yesterday, about like connections to music and things like that, and it kind of ties into what Ruth's saying about like how kind of easy it is. You can find a song or a tune or something, and you can ask someone at a session, where's it from, and then within a few hours, if you wanted to, you can go and visit the place that the song was written in. So you can have a real like feeling of a tune or a song, in a way with like other types of music, say like electronic music, for example. Like you can't do that thing. And that's just, it's a really lovely thing.
Which, speaking of, I think it's probably time we had more music. And we're going to listen to a piece now that doesn't come accompanied by a video. And I strongly recommend closing your eyes and putting your earphones in just to absolutely live it. But you don't have to, obviously, we can't make you. But I would also love to ask Sinead to bring us a little further into the world of the song. Tell us the background and why you chose it.
So the next song is called Via Extasia. And it's a song that was written by Liam Weldon, and it was written for his wife, Nellie. So Liam is dead 25 years, 26. I think his anniversary was quite recently. But he wrote this as like a love song for Nellie. And I met Nellie because I used to work in a traditional music pub in Smithfield, and she'd come in every Sunday and she'd sing songs, and I'd always try and work on a Sunday so I could hear her singing. And then we ended up becoming friends because I just decided I wanted to know more about Nellie. And she'd tell me like these little stories about her life with Liam, and things that he did. And we wanted to pick some songs from a repertoire that represented strong women. And to me, like, Nellie is just, she couldn't embody a stronger woman. And when Liam and Nellie, they lived in London, as many young people did back then, they decided that they were going to move back to Ireland. And Nellie has said a lot of people was asking them why were they moving back to Ireland, and that Liam had said that they were going to start a baby factory, and they moved back to Ireland and had 8 children. So often I think when we think of strong women, we think of women who are like amazing artists or scientists or historians or whatever it is, but like Nellie had a huge family and she raised all of them, and like she's amazing. But the song itself, it's not necessarily a romantic song. It's like it's very much about nature. And as far as I'm aware, I never met Liam. He was a huge, big dude. And I don't think that he was like very kind of like necessarily prone to romantic outbursts when you met him in person, but then he would write things like this for his wife. So the reason that we suggested that people put on headphones is so they can hear the lyrics. And I just, if anybody wrote anything like this for me, I'd just be totally blown away. And the fact that it's still here and her children get to listen to this song and knowing that their father wrote it for their mother, who's now I think 82, is it's really special. So yeah, Nanny gave us permission to sing it, and we have to like tip our hats to Nelly and to Liam every time that we get to sing it, because it's a really amazing song.
Brilliant, let's hear it. Thank you.
If you are the restless sea, and free from sorrow, pain, or ghost, and life forever truly own.
That was just beautiful. And I really am thinking in 2 weeks' time, it will be St. Valentine's Day. And if any of you out there are in love with someone who, as you so brilliantly put it, is not prone to romantic outbursts, you might want to run that song by them just to remind them of how powerful and moving love can be. Today's event is also an introduction of a sort to another event coming up with Solas Nua, which is a commission by Solas Nua for the Capital Irish Film Festival in Washington, D.C. on March 8th, which is back to our theme of Strong Women, International Women's Day. And it's a commission between Ruth and her fellow artist, Niamh Moriarty. And Ruth, could you talk us through that a little bit, what people can expect?
Yes, where to start? I guess, so me and Niamh Moriarty have been working together collaboratively as visual artists for about 10 years now. So the work that we have been doing over the past few years, just to give some context of the direction we're taking with this, we've been looking at the West in Ireland and our kind of how it exists in Irish and American imaginations, and how the West can kind of stand in for these totally contradictory ideas. Well, maybe not totally contradictory, but somewhat contradictory ideas of like wild freedom and beauty, which you might see in a film like Into the West, a 90s Irish film, or simultaneously kind of stands for poverty and hardship and exile. Thinking of like any of the literature from the Blasket Islands, or even films like The Quiet Man, which would have, had these small town, this sense of being trapped in kind of parochial rivalries in a small town. So thinking about what the West means here, and then thinking about the movement west of Irish people and the kind of draw that it's had for a long time, like our early Irish settlers going over to America, then obviously emigration during the famine, and then even the history of like transatlantic flights and ports and everything now. And then the doubling back as well of the kind of the Irish American vision of Ireland and what it is to return, is what are they returning to, and can you return? And then also thinking about our own fascination with American culture here, such as like the phenomenon of country and Irish music, which is an Irish version of country and Western music, which is just massive here. So this kind of shuttling back and forth is one thing we were thinking about. And then going back to this idea of the ancient and the modern kind of coexisting, we were also looking at like ferry roads, kind of lines through the landscape, abandoned railways, or even rights of way, and the way these kind of all can move through the land at different points in time and take on different significances and meanings, intersect. So with all that in mind, then we're taking these ideas and mapping them onto a story, which is a story that me and Eve have been telling for quite a few years, that we heard in an interview with the German filmmaker Werner Herzog. And he's telling a story about this set of twins from Yorkshire, which is a true story. And he's telling it as though he's going to make it into a film, which he hasn't yet. So there are these twins, and they were called Greta and Frida Chaplin. And when they grew up, they became completely inseparable, and they would speak in unison and do everything together and go everywhere together. And things like you'd hear that they had been seen holding a frying pan together, just frying one egg. like things like this. So Herzog talks about them and about how they fell in love with their neighbor, but then got taken to court by him for harassing him. And then the story just kind of spins away, but he keeps telling it sort of like it's fact. And it ends with the sisters putting on their wedding dresses and going off in search of a better life through a mountain, and various things happen. So we were thinking about this story of movement and longing for a better future and emigration and moving west and all of that. And that is kind of what will be behind the imagery that we are currently filming and preparing, which will be sort of sitting alongside a live performance of us singing. So the songs are kind of roughly following this narrative of emigration, and the imagery will complement that. But it's also, so we're thinking about Landless. The singing is like a kind of keening, which again, to bring it back to Brigid, she is said to have invented keening, which is like queen for cry. It's kind of a lament, that apparently when her son was killed in battle, she cried out, and that was the first keen that was heard in Ireland. They're almost thinking about the singing as a kind of a keening sound to go along with this imagery. And even I was kind of thinking about this, our retelling of Werner Herzog retelling this story in that in itself is not unlike the folk tradition. That we're kind of and the same with the paths and the fairy roads, we're accumulating these kind of layers of meaning as we go. So.
And do you have a title for it?
Yeah, the title is 2 Miles of Earth for a Marking Stone, which is it's the last line of another song that we sing called The Ballad of Spring Hill, which is written by Peggy Seeger about a mining disaster.
Curious subject. I love that idea though of stories wrapping up in stories and layering over time. And I'm always struck in Dublin, my house is just off Cork Street, and Cork Street is really grotty and overbuilt and windswept, but it's one of the 3 ancient processional routes that the tribes of Ireland would take into Dublin for their annual meetings. It's Cork Street, Thomas Street, and I actually can't remember the other one. But
Stony
if you
Batter,
look,
maybe?
Sorry?
Possibly Stony Batter?
Easily could be. Neil McCullough, the architect, has a lovely book, Dublin and Urban History, that looks at that layering. And it's there if you know how to find it. And I also think it's there buried or not so deeply buried in song and story and those traditions that you talk about. But I'm also thinking we're talking via Zoom, which has become such a lifeline for everyone. And we're imagining the audience, but I also know from my experience, whether it's talking on a stage or being in the audience, that audience completes a song and sometimes changes it. And I'm wondering what it's like for you guys at the moment to perform without audience. And maybe Sinead, you'd speak to
that. So you're referring to, we had a performance in the National Concert Hall earlier on this year, and we got to fulfill a dream and play on the main stage there. But yeah, there was no audience. There was nobody in the room except us. They had remote cameramen, remote sound engineers, and it felt like, I don't want to go down a road of like talking about how sad this whole thing is, like the lockdowns and that we don't get to see each other, because it really brought home to me how important, like, not only the people that you know in your lives, but also the strangers, like that. So for example, people that we don't know that come to our gigs, and how much they add to the atmosphere and to the feelings that we're having when we're singing songs, you know, and seeing people react in the audience, or like people laughing to one of my awful jokes. It you know, it really brought it back home how important that we all are to each other, you know. And And yeah, you know, people go to gigs for different reasons. You know, somebody might be having a really bad day or something bad has happened to them and they get solace in listening to some songs, or some people get really joyful from like going to one of our gigs, despite that with the fact that we only sing dirges, you know. But so yeah, it was a very strange experience, very strange. And you know, I'm hoping in the not too distant future that we can begin to share music together again, because even for us, we hadn't seen each other, so we couldn't touch each other, and we had to practice singing apart from each other, which was just such a foreign thing for us to do. So yeah, you know, I'm living in hope that very, very soon we'll be able to sing together again to an audience, and to feel that like the connection and that buzz again. So yeah.
Yeah, it will come.
Yeah.
One of the things that came up earlier was the mention of a revival period in traditional music, but I'm wondering if it ever goes away or if it's just always there latent and sometimes we need it more than other times. I think this would definitely count as a time when we need it more than other times. And I think it's enduring through live streaming and events like this, bringing music across borders and boundaries and melting them away. And I wonder what it is about those songs and stories that are so borderless, and I'm afraid landless too. And Maeve, maybe you could speak to that.
Well, sometimes I feel like when I'm singing a really old song that the song is actually singing me rather than me singing the song. And I think that's, I know I've said it before, but I think it's like an awareness of the fact that the song has been around for so much longer than I have. And there's like a reverence for it in that sense. But I think it also, it can bring a lot of comfort because there's this feeling that you know that you're connected to the history of the song and other people who've sung the song and other people who've heard the song, however many tens or hundreds of years ago. And so, yeah, there's this like comfort in that connection and that rootedness in your culture and your like emotional culture as well. And I personally find it quite cathartic. I mean, singing in general is cathartic for me, but I think traditional songs in particular, because they are about human experience, I guess. They're stories about human experience that is relatable, things like love and loss and sorrow and joy. So in that sense, I think that's why they've survived so long as well. It's just because they're universal over time, as you were saying earlier, and over borders as well. So
I suppose when
Sorry, no, go on, Lily.
just when I said folk revival, I think like what that often means is the kind of like when the music is crossing over into the mainstream, like if there's a period where it's, you know, like in Ireland, that's I suppose a very obvious like era of the Dubliners and the Chieftains, and when it was just really huge and international, and it's like it's touching something yeah, that kind of brings it out of itself. But there is, like you said, there's, I mean, so obviously in Ireland, you know, these families and this music that just continues kind of bubbling under the surface the whole time, really. So yeah, so that's kind of what I meant. And people are obviously talking about it at the moment because we have, yeah, like lots of kind of maybe traditionally inspired bands that are getting a lot of mainstream success. But I think exactly like you say, it is kind of cyclical, and sometimes it just touches on what people need or what people yeah sort of want at that time musically.
I quite like the sorry I was just going to say I quite like the kind of tension between the oldness of a song and then how people interpret it now, if you know what I mean. I think that that kind of creative tension can make it feel like it's alive as well, which is quite nice. So.
And I do really not just love, but take comfort from that idea that it's there for us when we need it. But sadly, we are coming close to the end of our session. Unsadly, we're going to end with one more gorgeous song. But before we do that, I want to say that you will find the music of Landless and their new album at Bandcamp. And also to thank Solas Nua for hosting us and putting this together. Lily, Ruth, Maeve, and Sinead, the whole team at Solas Nua again, all of you for joining us. As I said, do look out for Bleaching Bones, the album, and more on Landless at Bandcamp. And I want to thank you all for joining us as well, and wish you very safe, patient, I think that's a new thing to wish people, and happy St. Brigid's Day. And before we go to that final song, Sinead, would you talk us through what we're going to enjoy? Thank you.
Our final song is another song from Liam Weldon, actually. Well, Liam Weldon, he didn't write this song. It's a very ancient song, but he recorded it, and we got this from his singing. So as far as we're aware, he heard a traveller singer singing this song and took this version of it. So the song is called "The Well Below the Valio." And if anyone is interested in folk music and already knows the song, then when you hear this, you'll realize it's very different from the version that you might have heard Christy Moore singing or whatever. But yeah, okay, Ruth, if you want to interject on why we chose this one.
I think it was maybe just a good example of a particularly ancient one. It potentially goes back to biblical times. So, but then it's got like, actually, Maeve, I think you can describe this best.
Yeah, so there are many different versions of it. It's also a child ballad, but there are stories of it going back to or times like biblical stories of Jesus and the Samaritan woman at the well, who refuses him a drink. And there's also a kind of crossover about whether or not it might be linked to stories of Jesus and Mary Magdalene, because in some of the versions there are insinuations of incest and or infanticide, and people actually stopped singing those verses. But the version that we have doesn't have those verses in it, but it still holds quite a dark feeling about it, and we just love it.
So we will end on some very beautiful darkness, and thank you all again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There's